So in this segment, we're going to be talking about Dominic Cummings. There's a longer video here if you want to watch that instead of Dom's statements. You can click on the article and watch that. But they've got his statements here transcribed, so we'll run through that because it's a bit easier. So the Prime Minister's former top aide said Boris Johnson was unfit for the job, claiming he had ignored significant advice and wrongly delayed lockdown. So this is Dominic Cummings basically dropping bombs on Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson, which we do have to question why Dominic Cummings stayed in the job, and he does give some kind of justifications as to why, and then I'll tell you at that point why I think he stayed in the job. But he said tens of thousands of people who died who didn't need to die, Mr. Cummings added. He told MPs, the truth is that senior ministers, senior officials, senior advisors like me fell disastrously short of the standards that the public has a right to expect of the government in a crisis like this. He added, I would like to say to all the families of those who died unnecessarily how sorry I am for the mistakes that were made and for my own mistakes at that. So why, Dominic Cummings is basically, he's an intelligent man, okay? And he knows he has to get ahead of this because people would ask him about what was his role in the certain things. So what he's got ahead of it. Right, he's got ahead of it and said, look, this was the situation. He set the framing, basically, which is something he's very good at, which is, I tried to warn the Prime Minister, we tried to warn him, but he wouldn't listen, and it was his fault that the lockdowns were delayed, things like that. And by apologising and saying, like, I failed as well, he's doing what Eminem did in 8 Mile, where, you use all the disses that the other person could use against you, and you say all that, and then you attack that person, which is basically what he's done. He said, I accept that I made failings in certain areas, I couldn't convince the Prime Minister, I did my best, right, to convince the Prime Minister to go in a different direction. I couldn't do that. We didn't have a plan in place. We believed Matt Hancock when Matt Hancock lied to people. And so what he's saying is, like, I was naive. I shouldn't have believed the people that were in charge, etc. So he's doing the Eminem trick in 8 Mile, which is genuinely, it takes a lot of guts to pull off a strategy like that. It really does. Dominic Cummings claimed Mr. Johnson had told him he liked to be surrounded by chaos in Downing Street because it meant everyone had to look to the Prime Minister to see who was in charge, and that gives Boris Johnson a lot more leverage when there's chaos, because then people have to look to him for answers. People can't do their own thing. People are very reliant on him, and Boris Johnson loves that. He loves the attention. Asked if he thought Mr. Johnson was a fit and proper person to get the UK through the pandemic, Mr. Cummings replied no. I was thinking, why didn't Dominic Cummings leak more information to the press? But it's possible he's the one who leaked he denies it, but he's the one who leaked the reports of a second lockdown when Boris Johnson was basically forced into it because someone said, the country's going into lockdown in a few days or in a week or two, and then Boris Johnson kind of was forced into doing that lockdown. I wonder if that was Dominic Cummings that leaked that information. He denies it, but it's possible it was him. And I think if he said, look, I was the one who leaked it because this was the only way to go into second lockdown, I think this would give him a lot more leverage. I could be wrong there. Mr. Cummings said that despite nearly losing his own life to COVID, the Prime Minister thought the first national lockdown on the 23rd of May was a mistake, and he was against the so-called circuit breaker lockdown in autumn 2020 for economic reasons, despite the scientific advice. And we also know that the lockdown in August was far worse because he had delayed we know the lockdown later on after that was far worse because he had delayed the initial circuit breaker lockdown so much. 2-week circuit breaker is all they asked for, and we were in lockdown for like months, I think, after that. It's just ridiculous, this guy here, Boris Johnson. Let's not forget here, COVID almost killed him. He was in hospital. He had nurses looking over him. According to Dominic Cummings, they thought Boris Johnson was on his deathbed. He was not doing too great. Asked on what basis the Prime Minister had taken his decision, Cummings said he wasn't taking any advice, he was just taking his own decision, and that he was going to ignore the advice. So when they said that, they kept ignoring the science, the Labour Party have to cite this. They have to mention this. That Boris Johnson didn't listen to the science. He heard what they said and said, no, I'm not going to do that. He followed a hit and hope strategy. He added the cabinet wasn't involved or asked. So this was his chance to throw the cabinet under the bus, and he's chosen not to. It's possible because this is the truth, or it's possible that he knows the next Prime Minister will be one of those cabinet ministers and he doesn't want to annoy them. So it's very hard to figure out his motivations in some of the statements he makes, but at the same time, it's very interesting that he's the only people he's really attacked are Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock. That's it. Asked if the Prime Minister had said he would rather see bodies piled high than take the country into a third lockdown, as reported by the BBC, Cummings said, I heard that in the Prime Minister's study. So he said, let the bodies pile high rather than going to lockdown. That was a quote that was circulated by multiple outlets. It's possible that Dominic Cummings is the one that leaked this information to the media once again. So let's not forget this came after, I think this was the chatty rat jibe that Boris Johnson made about Dominic Cummings. So it's possible that Dominic Cummings is the one that leaked it to the press. Mr. Johnson denied making these comments. He also called them unsubstantiated, so we'll see if Cummings has some receipts, because there are other people in that area that might have heard him say that. Hancock allegation. So this is Dominic Cummings basically, hitting Matt Hancock with an RKO out of nowhere. Like, no, I did not see this coming, honestly. So the former advisor claimed the health secretary should have been fired for 15 to 20 different things, accusing him of criminal, disgraceful behaviour that caused serious harm. But again, he didn't do too many briefings against Matt Hancock, which is strange. He said he had repeatedly called on Johnson to sack Mr. Hancock, calling him completely incapable of doing his job. You got receipts, bro? If you have, let's see him. He says the Prime Minister had been furious when he came back to work after recovering from COVID to find that untested patients had been discharged to care homes in England, thereby allowing the virus to spread, Mr. Cummings claims. So if that's the case, then, when the inquiry comes, Matt Hancock's going to get fired over this, most likely. But, this is the thing where, Matt Hancock claimed that there was a protective ring put around the care homes, and we know that's categorically not true. Both he and the Prime Minister had been categorically in March, had been told categorically in March that people will be tested before they went back into care homes. But when it became public that this was not the case, we didn't hear anything from people like Dominic Cummings. This was allowed to happen. Cummings claiming that he was, he had tested positive for COVID and he was very ill, so he couldn't really do much about it. But throwing Matt Hancock under the bus for this one is very easy, and I feel like that's what they're going to do. Which it kind of is. It is his fault at the end of the day. This is his fault. This was the policy they spread because the NHS didn't have enough beds, which was the fault of the government. Subsequent government claims that putting a shield around care homes were absolute nonsense, which is true. It is absolute nonsense. If anything, they doomed care homes far worse than they would have been because their policy of letting COVID positive patients go back into care homes. They doomed these places. Mr. Cummings also attacked Hancock over PPE shortages and accused him of disgraceful behaviour in setting stupid targets of offering 100,000 COVID tests a day, which he said had disrupted wider work to establish the test and trace system. So if we look at the the PPE shortages and stuff like that, when they gave contracts to dodgy companies, how much of that did Dominic Cummings know about, and was he involved in any of it? Because we did see some kind of articles talking about how some of Dominic Cummings' former friends, I think, they had managed to get contracts. So it'd be interesting to see, something about, they paid a company for to see if COVID messaging was effective, I think. There's a lot of money, no bid contract. So that's going to be interesting to see if Cummings was involved in the Tory sleaze. But also the fact that, what Matt Hancock did was very stupid. He set a 100,000 target. He delayed a load of tests going out, and then he also counted tests in the post. So we definitely know he lied about the 100,000 target. Dominic Cummings confirming something we definitely already had confirmed. But, if you think about it like this, if you force all the tests to go out on a specific day, when they all come back in, you're going to be overwhelmed. So him setting that 100,000 target was just ridiculous. And the fact that Matt Hancock still says that he achieved this is a joke, and the fact that he hasn't been pulled up on it is ridiculous. You keep saying this in the House of Commons, and I'm like, Mr. Speaker, he's lying. Stop him. Committee Chairman Greg Clark said Mr. Cummings must provide written evidence to back up his claims about Matt Hancock, who will be quizzed by the committee in 2 weeks. So obviously this is a while ago, but there's still, I think, a week to go until Matt Hancock actually gives a statement, or at least a few days to go. So we'll see if Dominic Cummings has given any evidence, like physical evidence. Hancock said he had not seen the Cummings evidence in full, so that means he's probably seen part of it. Because if he doesn't watch the whole thing, I didn't watch it in full, so I could come out with the same statement. But it's about reading the spin, so he probably saw some of it, especially the bit where, Dominic Cummings was dropping bombs on him, absolutely going after the guy. And then Matt Hancock's like, I was saving lives. Like, no, you're not, brother. If anything, you have endangered more people through your role as Home Secretary than anything. All the NHS cuts, all of the other issues around testing, the fact that Serco got a contract, all of these things, if anything, you have harmed more people than you have helped, my friend. So The Health Secretary will continue to work closely with the Prime Minister to tackle the risk posed by variants. I mean, you've done a rubbish job of that because the India variant is already the dominant strain in the UK. So you're not doing a very good job of tackling the risk posed by variants. You're not doing a very job of saving lives. You're a joke. Matt Hancock's an absolute joke. In other explosive claims, Cummings claimed Johnson initially thought COVID was just a scare story and the new swine flu. I think he even called it the Kung flu, which is something that Trump said, which is pretty racist, to be honest. The Prime Minister had offered to get Chief Medical Officer Chris Whitty to inject him live on TV to show there was nothing wrong with the virus. I mean, surely Chris Whitty would be able to confirm that one if he was actually asked. That's comical, and that's not even surprising that an idiot like Boris Johnson would do that. Do you remember when Barack Obama pretended to drink water from Flint, Michigan to prove it was safe, and then it wasn't actually tap water from Flint, Michigan? It was like bottled water or something like that. Like, I kind of wish he did inject himself with COVID. That would have been hilarious. I wish he did. Johnson had never wanted tougher border controls to prevent the spread of the virus. We know that to be true because even now with the India one, he let that one into the country very easily. Also, the fact that the border controls, for the most part, for redless countries don't actually make sense. So yeah, he wanted to be like the mayor in Jaws who kept the beaches open despite the threat of a killer shark, which I think that's something that Boris Johnson has referenced many times, that he respects the mayor in Jaws for keeping the beaches open despite all the problems it caused. This is a whiteboard he published, and the handwriting here is not the best, so I couldn't read all of it, but it's basically about stopping the NHS from going into collapse, because ultimately the strategy was allow COVID to spread so long as ICU units weren't maxed out, which we know happened in a lot of hospitals. So that was the plan, is just to let people go into hospital. People can die, but you don't want death to the point where the hospitals completely collapse, which in some places they kind of did. They were maxed out capacity, all hands on deck, everything used pretty much. So yeah. Something about 2% death, I think, but I'm not sure. It's very hard to read the handwriting here. Who is Steve Powers? I have no idea what some of this stuff is. So no vaccine in 2020. We know we were lucky to get a vaccine in 2020, at least the Finnish one anyways. Less contact, no contact, contact illegal. So this is some of the ideas they kind of spit forward. The app, stuff like that. We also know the app that the NHS app is not very good, and was Dominic Cummings involved in that. He told the MPs the original plan had been limited intervention with the hope of achieving herd immunity, and he was completely baffled by Downing Street's denial of this. We know multiple news outlets put out the herd immunity strategy, especially Robert Peston, who wrote an article in The Spectator about it. So the herd immunity strategy was the one they wanted. He said the herd immunity strategy was abandoned when the scale of the death toll would result from it became clear, because the whole idea was, you shield people, the ones that are most at risk of catching the illness, and then it goes through the healthier people in society, and then it will burn itself out eventually because there won't be anyone left to catch it. But the problem is that didn't work, especially since you can catch it twice, and not to mention the fact that you didn't shield the people that needed shielding. That was another problem they had. Is this the way to Barnard Castle? Cummings was frank about his own failings and admitted that his defence of a trip to County Durham during the first lockdown had undermined public confidence. So again, he's going for the 8-mile defence, but he said he had made the journey due to threats against his family. That's not true. You said that you had to make the trip because your child needed care and both you and your wife were ill. That's why you said you made that trip. He said any responsible father would have done the same thing. That's what Michael Gove did. So it wasn't about threats to your family. And if that's the case, surely you'd live up there the whole time in Durham. You wouldn't live in London. And he defended his claim that he had driven his family to Barnard Castle to test his eyesight, saying that the story was too weird to have been made up. No, that's not how lies work. Just because it's weird or really weird doesn't mean that, I wouldn't have made up the eye test story, because that doesn't make complete sense. I think it's the case you got caught and you need to come up with a story, so this is the best you came up with at short notice. He didn't go full 8 Mile here, and that's the problem. He didn't go full Eminem and admit that this was a mistake of his, that he undermined public confidence, because at the end of the day, if he said that, look, I went there because, we were locked away for 2 weeks because of the self-isolation, and look, I wanted to have a little day out with my son and my wife on her birthday. That's all he had to say, and he would have made all those Tory ministers and MPs look like frauds because they defended him. That's what he should have done. He also gave his version of his departure from Downing Street, saying his relationship with Johnson had broken down after the second national lockdown in October. So I think he's trying to say that because of this lockdown, our relationship broke down because he didn't want to do the lockdown and I made him do the lockdown, or we pushed him to do it. That's possible. The fact that his girlfriend, Carrie Simmons, also wanted rid of me was relevant, but not at the heart of the problem. So she didn't like him at all. He said he regarded Mr. Johnson as unfit for the job, saying that he was trying to create a structure around the Prime Minister to try and stop what he thought, Cummings thought, were extremely bad decisions and push things through against his wishes. So what when people talk about the deep state in America, where they say that, the deep state's in control and they're manipulating our president and blah blah blah, so he can't make certain decisions, especially when it comes to the wars and stuff like that, right? What Dominic Cummings did is incredibly undemocratic, because no one elected him. People elected Boris Johnson, and despite the fact that he was incompetent, that he did the lockdowns late, that's the guy people voted for. And yeah, many people would have died more, but that's democracy. You voted for an idiot, and now you got an idiot. So the simple fact is, what Dominic Cummings did was probably the right thing morally, but incredibly destructive for democracy. He also described how a meeting of the Government Emergency Cobra Committee on the 12th of March had been disrupted by President Donald Trump wanting to start a bombing campaign against Iraq, and I couldn't figure out what he was talking about, because I thought he was talking about the murder of Qasem Soleimani, however you pronounce his name. But no, it's about the Camp Taji attacks, where I think the Iranians were bombing a US base, a US military base. Not the Iranians, Iranian-backed militia were bombing a US military base, and the Americans wanted to hit back. So this is the situation he's talking about around the 11th of March and the 13th of March. Launched air raids against Khatib Hezbollah facilities in Karbala airport. So this is the thing he was talking about. It took me a while to actually remember what he was talking about, because it was a long time ago and a lot has happened in the space of this year. So forgive me for that, but yeah, so there's that. Save lives. At the same time, he added Johnson's partner, Carrie Simmons, was going crackers about a completely trivial story in the Times regarding the dog she co-owned with the Prime Minister. Boris Johnson's casual disregard for the safety of the British people has had fatal consequences. We know that's true. Boris Johnson failing to actually do what was needed to be done is the problem here. From care homes to borders, repeatedly locking down too late and failing to learn from his mistakes, the Prime Minister Prime Minister's decisions and failures resulted in tens of thousands of avoidable deaths, and that's the key here. In any inquiry, this is the thing that they're going to be looking at, if it's a decent inquiry, because if Dominic Cummings is right that thousands of people, tens of thousands of people didn't have to die. They died mainly because of the late lockdowns and the fact that care homes weren't protected. That's the problem here. And this is the thing where I hope they ask Dominic Cummings a lot about this, and I hope they use his testimony against Boris Johnson and against Matt Hancock. So here we got Tobias Ellwood proving himself to be very stupid, so that ministers should be free to speak their minds and even ask silly questions without fear that one day they may be quoted or misquoted back to anything a minister asks, regardless of how stupid or intelligent, it should be recorded, because at the end of the day, they were elected for a reason. They were elected to lead. So if they ask stupid questions, they ask stupid questions. Like, it's not a big deal. We've all been there where we've asked a stupid question, right, in class or wherever. If you ask a dumb question, you get called out on it. You just say, look, we had to ask all the questions we could to get the information we could. In this situation, no question is a silly question. If you say, could we follow herd immunity and let this thing run through the country, you can say that's a silly question, right? Because you're saying that should we be allowed to kill people? But at the end of the day, that's not a stupid question, because we know that people are going to ask these questions. Why can't we just, take the virus and, most likely we'll survive? It's only 3% fatality rate, but we know that 3% of the British population is very high, right? Because there's 66 million plus people in this country. So unless you ask really dumb questions like, can my donor friend get a contract? This is very stupid from Tobias Ellwood. That completely, he further goes on to say, that completely diminishes the competence of the number 10 machine, because ministers can't ask stupid questions or be misquoted. Like, if someone misquotes you, just say, no, you've misquoted me. Like, and if you're scared someone's going to quote you because you asked a stupid question, then you're very insecure about your life, aren't you? Because ministers and MPs say stupid stuff all the time, and you get quoted all the time. So this guy, Tobias Ellwood, massive fraud. But what can we gather from this? Dominic Cummings stayed in the role, I think, predominantly because he wanted to reform the way Downing Street was run and the civil service. That's the reason he stayed, because he always talked about reforms and having some high risk science team where they're going to research high risk technologies and stuff like that. Stuff where the failure rate will be quite high because it's mainly just R&D. It's mainly on the research bit of R&D. So he's gone after Boris Johnson, saying he's not fit and stuff like that. But the question remains, why did Matt Hancock stay with him for so long then? Matt Hancock didn't leave. Boris Johnson didn't leave of his own volition. He was fired. Let's not forget that. He was fired. So he stayed with Boris Johnson for that long, and he was fired in the end. He didn't leave. He didn't resign. He was fired. So that's very strange. He's gone after Matt Hancock because Matt Hancock's been the one that I think did the worst job out of any minister. I mean, he had the hardest job, arguably, but he did the worst job. So that's probably the reason why he's gone after Matt Hancock. It's very possible that Matt Hancock had lied to Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings initially about the care homes thing, but they never changed policy. It took them a while to change policy. So if Boris Johnson knew he'd been lied to, they should change policy straight away and said, look, anyone going to care home has to be tested. Anyone, any user, client, whatever you call people in care homes, senior citizens have to be tested before they go into a care home. Have to. And they have to have a negative test. But, he didn't do that. It took a while for that to happen. So, Dominic Cummings is trying to protect himself instead of trying to say, look, I failed. There were people far more intelligent than me that had to make decisions that I wasn't qualified to make. Kind of the 8 Mile defence. But the simple fact is he kind of still defended his Barnard Castle trip, which is a problem. So, I don't have a ton of sympathy for Dominic Cummings, but this is just more confirmation of the stuff we already knew. But anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below. We've got, I think, one or two more clips of Red Dom Redemption that I wanted to talk about. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.